The Gospel of Judas. This text, discovered in Egypt in the 1970s and written in the 2nd century CE, completely changes how we see Judas, the disciple who betrayed Jesus. In the Bible, Judas is remembered as the man who handed Jesus over for money, but here he's described as the only disciple who truly understands him. It claims that Judas was asked by Jesus to betray him, not out of greed, but to carry out a divine plan, allowing Jesus' spirit to be freed from the material world. This idea comes from Gnostic teachings, which believed that hidden knowledge, called gnosis, was the path to salvation. The other disciples are portrayed as blind and foolish, while Judas alone is enlightened. Early church leaders, like Irenaeus, rejected the text as dangerous and heretical because it clashed with the 4 Gospels everyone already trusted. It was never accepted into the Bible, but it remains fascinating today. Instead of a greedy betrayer, Judas becomes the most faithful disciple. That twist makes it one of the most controversial, lost Gospels ever found. Books of Maccabees. These Jewish writings tell the story of courage during a dark chapter in history. They describe the revolt of Judah Maccabee and his brothers against the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BCE. These men refused to abandon their faith, even under threat of death. Their victory restored the temple in Jerusalem, an event still remembered each year during Hanukkah. The first 2 books are included in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but not in Protestant or Jewish ones. For Jews, they were left out because they were written in Greek rather than Hebrew. For Protestants, reformers like Martin Luther dismissed them as Apocrypha. 2 more books carry the same name but are even less known. The third tells of Jewish struggles in Egypt, while the 4th is more of a philosophical essay about reason and martyrdom. Even though none are in the Jewish canon and most Protestants reject them, they remain crucial historical sources for understanding faith, resilience, and Jewish identity under foreign rule. Proto-Evangelium of James. This early Christian text, written around 150 CE, fills in details about Mary's life that the Bible leaves out. It begins with her parents, Joachim and Anna, who miraculously conceive her after years of barrenness. As a child, she's presented to the temple and raised in holiness, almost like a sacred vessel. It highlights Mary's purity, even suggesting that Joseph was an elderly widower chosen to protect her. That detail explains why the Gospels mention Jesus' brothers. They are seen here as Joseph's children from a previous marriage. The story also changes Jesus' birth setting, placing it in a cave rather than a stable. Midwives are present, and miraculous signs fill the moment. Despite its influence, church leaders never accepted it as scripture. It was written too late, its author is unknown, and its details were considered embellishments. Still, it had a massive impact, especially on Catholic and Orthodox traditions about Mary's purity and role in salvation history. Testament of Solomon. This strange and fascinating story claims to reveal how King Solomon built the Temple of Jerusalem not just with workers and stone, but by controlling demons. According to the tale, the archangel Michael gave Solomon a magical ring engraved with a special seal. With it, he could summon, question, and command spirits. These demons weren't random monsters. They were linked to stars, illnesses, and specific sins. Solomon would force them to explain their powers, then use them to finish the temple and even heal people. Names like Asmodeus and Abazu, which later became famous in medieval demonology, appear here long before Christian Europe gave them new life. The text blends Jewish tradition with Greek and Egyptian ideas about magic and astrology. Because of this mix, it was never accepted as scripture. It clashed with biblical teaching, where God alone commands creation. Still, it gives us a glimpse into how ancient people thought about demons, power, and the supernatural. It's more folklore than faith, but it shows how legends about Solomon grew far beyond what we find in the Bible. Acts of Peter. This 2nd century story follows the Apostle Peter after Jesus' resurrection. It describes his travels, preaching, and incredible miracles. One of the most famous scenes is his showdown with Simon Magus, a sorcerer who tried to mimic the power of God. The result is a public humiliation for Simon, showing the difference between false magic and true faith. The story ends with one of the most dramatic moments in Christian tradition, Peter's crucifixion upside down in Rome. According to the text, he asked for this because he felt unworthy to die in the same way as Jesus. Although the Bible never records this detail, it became widely believed and shaped Christian art for centuries. Church leaders never accepted the book as scripture. Its Gnostic ideas, late writing, and exaggerated miracles put it outside the canon. Still, it shaped the way countless Christians imagined Peter's death and cemented the symbol of upside-down crucifixion in tradition. Apocalypse of Abraham. This Jewish text, written between 70 and 150 CE, retells Abraham's early story with an apocalyptic twist. It begins with Abraham rejecting the idols made by his father. After destroying them, he is chosen by God and guided by an angel named Yahoel on a journey into the heavens. Along the way, Abraham is shown incredible visions: angels, the throne of God, cosmic battles between good and evil, and prophecies about Israel's future. He also sees warnings about the destruction of the temple and the final judgment of humanity. Many of its themes echo ideas found in other apocalyptic texts, like 1 Enoch, especially the connection between sin and fallen angels. Despite its vivid storytelling, it was never included in the Jewish canon. It was written too late, in a style more mystical than historical. But it reveals how Jews of that period understood suffering, faith, and hope during times of crisis. For those searching for meaning in dark days, it was a reminder that God still held the future. Acts of Paul and Thecla. This story, written in the 2nd century, introduces Thecla, a young noblewoman whose life changes after hearing Paul preach. Inspired by his message about faith and celibacy, she abandons her engagement, her wealth, and her family's expectations. This decision outrages her family, who pressure authorities to punish her. She is sentenced to death multiple times, but every attempt fails. Thecla miraculously survives fire, wild animals, and even baptizes herself when thrown into a pool of dangerous seals. Her courage and determination made her a symbol of devotion, especially among women in the early church. She was celebrated as someone who placed faith above fear and social status. Even though the story was incredibly popular, the church never accepted it as scripture. Its anonymous authorship, unusual miracles, and strong promotion of celibacy over marriage made it too controversial. Still, Thecla's story lived on, and she was remembered in some traditions as a saint whose faith inspired generations. Ascension of Isaiah. This mystical work, compiled between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, combines prophecy, martyrdom, and visions of heaven. It begins with the account of Isaiah's death under King Manasseh, portraying him as a faithful prophet killed for speaking the truth. The story then shifts to apocalyptic warnings about the end of the world, filled with vivid imagery of cosmic conflict. The most dramatic section describes Isaiah being guided by an angel through 7 layers of heaven. Along the way, he witnesses angels, divine beings, and finally the great moment when Christ descends to earth through the Virgin Mary and later returns in glory. Its teachings, however, raised concerns. Some parts suggested Christ was less than God the Father, which clashed with accepted Christian doctrine. Combined with its uncertain origins and unusual visions, church leaders chose not to include it in the Bible. Still, it offers a striking picture of how some early Christians imagined heaven and the mystery of Christ. Apocalypse of Peter. One of the earliest Christian visions of the afterlife, this 2nd century text takes Peter on a guided tour with Jesus through heaven and hell. Heaven is described as peaceful, full of beauty and joy for the righteous. But hell is terrifying, with punishments tailored to each sin. Liars are hung by their tongues, adulterers burned, and blasphemers tormented. The descriptions are brutal but powerful, and the book became very popular in some early churches. It was even read publicly in worship for a time, showing just how much influence it had. Some versions, like the Ethiopian one, also added visions of cosmic destruction and the end times. Despite its early use, church leaders eventually rejected it. The gruesome imagery, mythological influences, and conflicts with the Book of Revelation made it too problematic. Yet its impact lasted, inspiring later works like Dante's Inferno. It shows how early Christians wrestled with the idea of final judgment in vivid and unforgettable ways. Acts of Thomas. This dramatic story, likely written in the early 3rd century, tells how the Apostle Thomas ended up spreading the gospel in India. Instead of volunteering, the tale says Jesus sold Thomas to a merchant so he would be forced to travel east. Once in India, Thomas preaches, heals the sick, casts out demons, and even raises the dead. The book includes strange and memorable scenes. In one episode, a donkey actually speaks. In another, Thomas baptizes people by bringing back someone who had died. The story also makes Thomas the twin of Jesus, symbolizing the connection between body and spirit, a theme tied to Gnostic beliefs. Though some Indian Christian communities cherish the tradition that Thomas reached India, this version was never accepted as scripture. Its anonymous authorship, bizarre miracles, and mystical theology made it too far outside mainstream teaching. Even so, it remains one of the most colorful and unusual apocryphal works connected to the apostles. Secret Gospel of Mark. In 1958, a scholar named Morton Smith claimed to have discovered a hidden letter from Clement of Alexandria that mentioned a longer secret version of the Gospel of Mark. According to the letter, this text contained extra scenes, including a resurrection story involving a young man. It hinted at special teachings that Jesus supposedly shared only with certain disciples. The problem is, the supposed letter was found in the back of a printed 17th century book, and the original pages later disappeared. No other ancient source mentions this longer gospel, and the contents raised more questions than answers. Most scholars today doubt it's authentic. Some think it was a modern hoax, while others see it as a misunderstanding. Either way, it was never part of any biblical canon. It remains more of a scholarly mystery than a genuine lost gospel, but the debate around it continues. Gospel of the Egyptians. This mysterious work, probably written in the 2nd century CE, is linked to early Gnostic Christianity. Unlike the familiar 4 Gospels, it doesn't tell the story of Jesus' life, miracles, or crucifixion. Instead, it presents symbolic dialogues about creation, divinity, and spiritual enlightenment. The text is tied to the Scythian Gnostic movement, which saw the physical world as flawed and taught that salvation came through hidden spiritual knowledge. Some passages even reject marriage and childbearing, seeing them as traps that keep humanity bound to the material world. It also breaks traditional gender roles, teaching that salvation restores people to a pure, spiritual state beyond male or female. Church leaders quickly dismissed it. Its teachings contradicted basic Christian doctrine, and its mystical style was too far removed from the gospel message. Today, only fragments survive, but they show just how diverse and experimental early Christianity could be before the canon was firmly established. And that's 12 more books that never made it into the Bible. Some were too late, some too radical, and some just too strange, but each reveals how diverse early faith really was. Which one shocked you the most, Judas as a hero, Thecla's daring escapes, or Solomon commanding demons? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.